The Galactic Conclave had never seen a candidate quite like her. Mara Ellison stood in the registration hall of the Helix Academy, surrounded by beings who towered over her by 3 feet, beings with 4 arms and crystalline exoskeletons, beings whose very breath left frost in the air. She was 5'4", brown-haired, and holding a crumpled protein bar wrapper she hadn't found a bin for yet. Professor Kael Veyron studied her from behind his obsidian desk, his 4 violet eyes cycling through expressions that loosely translated to disbelief, pity, and mild administrative inconvenience. "Candidate Ellison," he said, his voice resonating at 3 frequencies simultaneously. "You are aware that the Helix trials were designed for the apex species of the Conclave. Beings who have evolved beyond baseline biological limitation." Mara finished chewing. "Yeah," she said. "Sounds fun." Kael Veyron had been trial director for 240 years. In that time, he had watched empires collapse, stars die, and 17 different species attempt the 5 trials and fail. He had never, not once, heard a candidate describe the trials as fun. He stamped her admission form before he could think better of it. Trial 1, the Gravity Well of Korath. The first trial took place on a moon where gravity shifted unpredictably between 1G and 9G without warning. The purpose was to test physical adaptability. Most species brought gravitational compensators. The Vorkai, 6-limbed behemoths from a high-gravity world, were expected to dominate. Mara brought knee braces and chalk for her hands. When the 9G slams hit, sudden, brutal, the kind that turned lesser candidates into puddles of groaning biology, Mara dropped to all 4s and crawled. She kept her center of gravity low. She timed her movement windows during the 1G reprieves with a counting rhythm she'd learned from free solo climbing on Earth's cliff faces, a hobby her mother had called aggressively unnecessary. 3 of the Vorkai candidates quit in hour 2. Their compensators had malfunctioned under the magnetic interference. They hadn't trained for failure. They had trained for equipment. Mara had trained for Earth, where everything was trying to kill you and the only backup plan was your own stubbornness. She crossed the finish marker in 4th place overall. Professor Kael Veyron reviewed the footage 3 times. He flagged her file with a notation that translated roughly to anomaly. Monitor. Trial 2, the Silence Deep. The second trial was psychological, a sensory deprivation chamber for 72 hours, designed to test mental cohesion. Species with hive minds or collective consciousness had a natural advantage. Even solitary species typically had neurological redundancies, inner thought streams that kept them anchored. Humans, the briefing noted, were singular. Isolated. Known to fragment under prolonged solitude. What the briefing failed to account for was that humans had invented the concept of being bored and had subsequently invented 10,000 things to do about it. Mara spent the first 6 hours running through every song she'd ever memorized. Then she rebuilt, in her mind, the entire layout of her grandmother's house in Nairobi, every drawer, every smell, every creak of the floorboards. She told herself the plot of every book she'd read. She composed a letter to her little brother. She worked through a math problem she'd abandoned in university. When the chamber opened at 72 hours, the monitoring team expected to find a candidate in mild psychological distress. They found Mara Ellison asleep, having apparently decided that if she couldn't do anything else, she might as well rest up for the next trial. Her neural coherence score was 97.3%. "This is an error," said one of Kael Veyron's assistants. "It is not," said Kael Veyron, who was beginning to feel something he had not felt in decades. It felt uncomfortably like interest. Trial 3, the Toxin Gauntlet. The third trial was biochemical. Candidates were exposed to 12 progressively aggressive environmental toxins and had to maintain function long enough to synthesize an antidote from available compounds. It was, in theory, designed to test chemical resilience and problem-solving under biological duress. In practice, it was designed to be failed. The 12th toxin had no known antidote. The point was to see how candidates responded to an impossible problem. The expected response was elegant defeat, a graceful acknowledgement of limitation, scored on composure and methodology. Mara's response was to drink an alarming quantity of activated charcoal solution she'd synthesized from trial-available carbon compounds in the first 20 minutes, before the toxins even began, and spend the rest of the trial methodically flushing her system while working on the antidote problem with what Kael Veyron could only describe as offensive practicality. She did not solve the 12th toxin. No one ever had. But she was the first candidate in Academy history to reach toxin 12 while still, technically, dancing. A slow, deliberate movement she explained afterward was to keep her lymphatic system active. She scored highest in the trial's history. Not because she won. Because she refused, at every stage, to stop trying. Trial 4, The War of Minds. The fourth trial was a direct cognitive combat, a neural interface tournament where candidates competed in strategic simulations of escalating complexity. The Thessali were favorites, silicon-based beings who processed information at speeds no biological brain could match. The simulations were designed to reward pure calculation. Nobody had told them about human intuition. Mara lost the first 3 rounds. Badly. She was slower. Her processing was messier, more emotional, more chaotic. The Thessali candidate she was paired against had never lost a simulation in his life. By round 4, he was making mistakes. Not because Mara was faster. Because she was unpredictable. Her strategies didn't follow logical progressions. They followed hunches, pattern recognition built from 10,000 years of human storytelling and game theory and the particular madness of a species that had looked at every dangerous thing in the universe and said, "What if I tried that?" She won the next 7 rounds straight. The Thessali candidate filed a formal complaint. The simulation, he argued, had been compromised by irrational inputs. Kael Veyron dismissed the complaint. He was smiling, an expression his species rarely used, and which made his junior staff deeply uncomfortable. Trial 5, The Dying Star. The 5th trial was impossible by design. Candidates were placed in a failing orbital station above a star entering its red giant phase. They had 4 hours to prevent catastrophic station failure using only the equipment on board, equipment that was, by intent, insufficient. The trial was meant to measure grace under total defeat. To see if a candidate could make peace with the unwinnable. Every species had a philosophical framework for noble failure. The Vorkai had the Keth, the honorable surrender. The Thessali had Silmara, the acceptance of computational limits. Even humans, Kael Veyron had the concept of tragedy. What he had not read, what no conclave xenologist had properly catalogued, was the human concept of spite. Mara looked at the failing station. She looked at the insufficient equipment. She looked at the dying star painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Then she started improvising. She cannibalized 3 non-essential systems to reinforce the 4th. She used the station's waste heat venting as an emergency thruster. She repurposed a communication array into a makeshift radiation shield. None of it was elegant. None of it was supposed to work. At the 3-hour 58-minute mark, with 2 minutes to spare, Mara Ellison brought the station's core systems back to 34% functionality, enough to signal for rescue, enough to keep life support running, enough to survive. The simulation ended. The lights came up. The monitoring team stared at their screens in silence. No one had ever passed Trial 5. The trial could not be passed. It was mathematically, structurally, philosophically impossible to pass. They called Kael Veyron immediately. He found her sitting on the floor of the simulation chamber, eating the second half of a protein bar she'd apparently saved from registration. She looked up at him with dark eyes that held no particular triumph, just the calm, level gaze of someone who had done what needed doing. "Candidate Ellison," he said slowly. "Do you understand what you've accomplished?" Mara considered the question seriously. I kept the lights on, she said. Kael Veyron was silent for a long moment. 240 years. 17 species. 5 trials. Yes, he said at last, something shifting in his ancient voice, something that sounded, improbably, like reverence. You kept the lights on. He extended his hand, four-fingered, violet-skinned, trembling very slightly. Welcome, said Professor Kael Veyron, trial director of the Helix Academy, to the conclave. Mara shook his hand, finished her protein bar, and started looking for a bin. Some species evolved past their limits. Humans just refused to acknowledge the limits existed.